The making of Aluna. Synopsis. Born into a world where lineage and strength dictate worth, Elara Quinn is a quiet, dutiful werewolf who has always been overshadowed by her younger, spoiled sister, Elara. While Elara toils in silence, creating beauty with her hands and hiding unimaginable strength, Elara basks in praise, destined, according to their mother, to become the Luna of their pack. But fate has other plans. When the royal ball approaches and Elara sets her sights on the returning alpha heir, Karen, Elara is pushed further into the shadows, even giving up the dress she made for herself, one that unknowingly could change everything. What the world doesn't see, however, is the storm brewing beneath Elara's calm exterior. She has a secret. She shifted at 13, defeated rogues as a child, and harbors a power that even her own pack could not imagine. Sent away unexpectedly to train as a moonlight, a prestigious warrior tasked with overseeing alphas, Elara begins to uncover her true potential. Yet as mysterious phantom pains plague her and secrets unravel, she realizes that power comes with consequences, and loyalty can be a mask for betrayal. With an elite academy full of powerful male candidates, and one girl Elara, who was never meant to be there, the fated Luna is a gripping tale of hidden strength, quiet resilience, and a girl who may not want to be Luna, but may be destined to become something far greater. Episode 1. The following scenario is set 5 months hence. It had been more than 5 months since she had last been in contact with her family, who she perceived as a loving and supportive unit. This period preceded her departure for the moonlight test. After a period of 1 month had elapsed, the subject returned to her familial unit, thereby eliciting surprise from her family members due to the fact that she had passed the moonlight test. This outcome was met with astonishment, as it contradicted the expectations of the observers. It is imperative to elucidate the mechanisms that enabled Elara to assume the role of a watcher of the packs. This position bestowed upon her the authority to exercise comprehensive judgment over the alpha of each pack, a prerogative that encompassed the authority to dismiss them from their position if deemed necessary. He was among the small number of individuals who were directly under the command of His Highness, the King of all werewolves. Her mother's encouragement to take the test was merely a stratagem to draw her away from the pack so that her younger sister could usurp her mate. It was estimated that, given the time required for the training and the test itself, she would be absent from the pack for a period of 5 months. During this time, it was anticipated that her sister would have already assumed the role of Luna, leaving her with no opportunity to address the situation. However, a series of events led to a profound shift in her perception of her loved ones, allowing her to see their true faces. The Academy had previously reduced the duration of the period. The duration of the test was reduced from 5 months to a single month. Consequently, upon her return, she found herself present for the Luna ceremony of her sister. She departed from her designated pack territory under the assumption that she would not have the opportunity to return and reunite with her family. The loss of her mate was of little consequence to her, for she had been more wounded by the actions of her family. However, after a period of 5 months had elapsed at which point she would have typically returned home, had the scheduling for the testing not been altered, she found herself in a position that defied her expectations. She was holding the arm of the Werewolf King, the most formidable of werewolves. She awaited the opening of the grand doors of the ballroom and the subsequent announcement of their arrival by the doorman. Despite the fact that the ball took place in the compound of the royal palace, she was mere moments away from seeing the parents she had thought she would never see again. The present time is characterized by a particular set of circumstances. The utterance of sister was perceived. A sudden, loud noise, such as a shout, followed by the abrupt opening of a door, is sufficient to rouse even the most deeply asleep individuals. This is particularly salient for individuals such as Elara, who, by virtue of her perpetual awareness of her environment, is even more cognizant of these phenomena. Despite the early hour, Elara was unable to indulge in a period of rest, as is often the case. Since attaining the age of 12, she has been responsible for the preparation of breakfast and the execution of various domestic tasks. Initially, her mother had begun to assign her minor household tasks, which she had completed with ease, but which had gradually become more challenging. In practice, she was the primary executor of the tasks, with her mother providing occasional assistance. The necessity for her mother to provide explicit instructions had become obsolete. It was already standard practice for her to perform the assigned domestic tasks. The acquisition of this skill set will prove advantageous once you embark on family life. It is imperative to initiate the process of familiarizing oneself with domestic responsibilities at an early age, as otherwise there is a risk of being perceived as inadequately fulfilling one's parental duties. This was the explanation her mother provided at the time, and despite her mother's generally cold disposition towards her, she accepted it without any resentment. She perceived her mother's judgment as superior. After a decade had passed, she had begun to question whether her mother's actions were genuinely aligned with her best interests. The question arises as to how such certainty could be attained in the face of such uncertainty. Her younger sister was only 2 years her junior, nevertheless, she would still enter her room and demand breakfast if she were tardy in its preparation. Her younger sister, now 20 years of age, had never engaged in such domestic tasks as sweeping, washing clothes, cleaning her room, cooking her own food, or helping to set the table. Even the simple task of folding her own garments was an activity with which she was unacquainted. The only instances in which she held the cutlery in her hands were when she was eating. It is noteworthy that she had never washed the utensils she personally used, nor had she ever removed them from the table after use. This practice was likely an extension of her own habits, and it is likely that her family members exhibited similar behaviors. Her mother did not explicate the discrepancy in treatment to her directly, rather, she would invariably remark to her sister that she was fated to become Aluna, thereby rendering any effort to learn such skills futile, as others would undoubtedly undertake them on her behalf. Upon first hearing it, she experienced a profound emotional response, characterized by a sense of profound sadness. From the perspective of the subject's mother, this indicated that her sister was of a higher social standing than she was. The subject's mother's assessment of her as Luna material did not cause her any distress, as she had no aspirations of becoming a Luna. The restrictions imposed by her role as the alpha's mate were not at all to her liking. Indeed, she harbored no desire to be a Luna. The emotional distress experienced by the subject was attributable to a sense of rejection, stemming from the realization that the level of affection she had anticipated from her mother was not reciprocated. This sentiment was analogous to the emotional neglect she had previously endured from her sister. She would have been content with even a fraction of the level of care her sister received from her mother. However, this perspective is representative of her former self, specifically the individual who was 14 years of age and observed that her mother exhibited no inclination to educate her younger sister in the art of a housewife. Notwithstanding her sentiments at the time, she refrained from disclosing her concerns to her mother. Her personality has been characterized by a tendency towards reticence and a serious demeanor. Her peers exhibited a marked reluctance to engage with her, and adults often perceived her as being more mature than her years. Her countenance was seldom one to be seen wearing a smile, and she found herself incapable of articulating the affectionate compliments that her sister was known to proffer. Her sister's tendency to engage in flattery towards adults was perceived as endearing, yet she found it disconcerting to emulate such behavior. She believed it would come across as insincere and incongruent with her own disposition. It was hypothesized that the primary factor contributing to the observed phenomenon was the perceived absence of a close relationship with her mother and family. However, she found herself unable to prevent it. She was a person of few words, and as time passed, she became more and more introverted. It should be noted that she would never voice such concerns. This was her family, and despite the perceived absence of affection, she did not endure mistreatment or neglect. The subjects reported perceiving the sounds at a distance that was neither too close nor too far from their current location. Despite the absence of explicit verbalization, her affection was evident in her actions, thereby demonstrating a profound and underlying love for her children. The most compelling evidence of her commitment was that, despite her own discomfort, she proceeded with her morning routine of preparing breakfast for the young lady, who was displaying a petulant gesture. The diminutive female before her, endowed with curly, lengthy, blonde tresses, a diminutive countenance, captivating blue eyes, and diminutive rosy lips, exhibited palpable impatience, a trait that was manifestly evident through the persistent tapping of her foot. "I am currently awake. Please accept my apologies, I was indisposed and did not commence breakfast. What would you like to eat?" Elara inquired as to her whereabouts while she was in the process of securing her hair in a ponytail and inspecting the wardrobe for an alternative set of attire. The subject indicated a desire for a fruit salad, pancakes, a warm cocoa, and other assorted items. The girl paused briefly, contemplating further culinary options. "In addition, I would like to request that you prepare some cupcakes. During the previous picnic excursion, I procured a selection of these items and distributed them among my associates." The recipients expressed profound satisfaction with the provisions. Specifically, the ones adorned with fondant flowers. At long last, she articulated her desires, then proceeded directly to her chamber, disregarding any expectation of her sister's consent. Elara's profound affection for her younger sister rendered unnecessary any form of solicitation on Lyra's part. The latter was only required to state it, and she would comply. Elara's attention was drawn to the rear of the young woman, who was moving at a hastened pace. She shook her head, displaying a subtle smile, as she proceeded to select her attire. She initiated a search for comfortable garments and exhibited a frown when another cramp manifested in her abdomen. As the cramps began, the subject's face began to exude perspiration, and subsequently, an increased quantity of water droplets were observed on her small face. She grasped her attire and awaited the conclusion of the phenomenon, scarcely managing to direct her feet toward the corner of the bed to take a seat. "I apologize, Elara. I am endeavoring to rectify the situation, but it appears that I am unable to alleviate the discomfort in your abdomen. Naira, the subject's wolf, exhibited signs of concern regarding the discomfort she was experiencing, which she found peculiar, as she was unable to cease the sensation. It may be advisable to consider the potential merits of. Naira had barely begun to propose an additional solution when Elara interrupted her. It is manageable, I have the capacity to cope. It is hypothesized that the pain will subside when the patient engages in physical movement. While she was aware of the solution, she considered it to be minor and anticipated that it would likely dissipate with time. It was preferable to simply endure the discomfort until it resolved itself, rather than jeopardizing the discovery of her condition by others. The potential consequences outweighed the benefits, rendering the endeavor unfeasible. In any case, she demonstrated sufficient resilience. The patient exhibited a peculiarity in her pain, as she had no antecedent medical conditions. It is noteworthy that she had never been afflicted with a respiratory illness such as a cold. Indeed, she had not suffered from any such ailment since her birth. The wolf's inclination to engage in rational discourse was counterbalanced by the long-standing respect shared between the two subjects, who had first undergone the transformation process at the age of 13. In instances where assistance was requested, her demeanor did not align with the expected norms of courtesy and respect. The subject merely had to articulate her desires, and they would be fulfilled. It was an implicit accord between them, one that transcended the use of explicit language. In the event that Elara expressed a desire for something, Naira was aware that she would articulate it, obviating the necessity for persuasion. The cramps eventually subsided after a brief period, and without additional rest, she proceeded to dress herself and descend the stairs. Elara, you have finally been elevated to a position of prominence. Her mother articulated her displeasure with a sternness that betrayed an imminent loss of patience. Affirmative. I apologize. I will commence the day's repast. She offered a sincere apology while expeditiously securing the apron around her waist, subsequently directing her attention to the procurement of the necessary ingredients. Proceed promptly, please. Lucien's imminent arrival is due to his early training obligations today. It is also imperative to remember to pack a lunch for the dog. The duration of the training program remains unknown. The woman's mother informed her while she was retrieving her car keys from her purse. I will be absent for approximately 4 to 5 hours. I am having lunch with Cynthia today and I will also be conducting some shopping. She proceeded to elaborate on this topic, exhibiting a notable lack of curiosity regarding the pallor of her daughter's complexion. However, it is noteworthy that she had not observed her closely enough to discern this detail. Elara signaled her comprehension with a nod and then proceeded to incorporate the pancake mix into the batter. She adeptly set the table, placed the food on it, and arranged the containers with the beautifully decorated cupcakes for her sister and lunch for her brother. Precisely at the moment when she was concluding her assigned tasks, her brother and sister made an appearance, coming down the stairs in tandem. They took their seats at the table, as was customary, and proceeded to consume their breakfast. Following the expression of gratitude for the meal and the collection of their containers, they promptly departed. Outside the door, her brother inhaled deeply as he proceeded toward his vehicle. What is the basis for your sense of relief? It is not acceptable to suggest that you continue to experience discomfort in providing her with assistance with setting the table or cleaning up after meals. Elara emitted a sound of amusement, formulating a taunt directed at her younger brother. The young male, aged 18 years, possessed slightly curled, wavy black hair, brown eyes, and a sharp, handsome face. He turned slightly to face Elara, a slight frown forming between his eyebrows. "And, you don't perceive it to be in poor taste? It is evident that she allocates a greater proportion of her time and efforts to you than to me." The subject displays a high level of receptiveness to the user's requests. It is evident that the subject's pallor was not observed. Despite her evident indisposition, she proceeded to prepare breakfast. He expressed profound dismay and indignation at his sister's actions. The latter exhibited no recognition of her errors, despite direct indications from the former, as evidenced by her reaction. "Come on. The subject's affection for us is well documented, as is her inclination to perform domestic tasks. It should be noted that these tasks are not obligatory, they are performed of her own volition. Furthermore, I did not observe any attempts on your part to provide assistance to her, sir." In response, she exhibited a state of unruffled amusement, characterized by a spontaneous expression of mirth. It is imperative to consider the ethical implications of criticizing her actions, particularly in light of her status as a public figure. Elara had never engaged in introspection regarding her actions. Her mother frequently asserted that she was destined for greatness and would one day become a distinguished Luna. This assertion is further substantiated by the wolf's rank, which is congruent with the expected parameters for a Luna. Consequently, the question arises as to how an individual aspiring to a leadership role could manage domestic responsibilities. She perceived her brother to be quite humorous. Lucien did not deem it necessary to correct her, and Elara exhibited a perpetual sense of arrogance. The only words she would listen to were those of their mother. However, this was solely attributable to the fact that her mother had consistently provided her with affirmations that had a positive effect on her self-esteem. With regard to the other sister, Elara, it is evident that she has always played a maternal role in their lives to a greater extent than their mother has. The subject's mother was consistently in proximity to the Pax Luna, Cynthia. In the absence of her presence alongside the Luna, she was engaged in shopping activities. Since childhood, Elara has been responsible for the majority of domestic tasks. The subject was approximately 8 years of age when his sister assumed responsibility for their care. Initially, when she undertook the tasks, he endeavored to assist her. However, his sister deemed him to be insufficiently mature and precluded him from doing so. Subsequently, as he matured, his mother asserted that he should refrain from interfering with her pedagogical methods for each child. Consequently, she did not permit him to assist her. Consequently, he engaged in activities that either escaped the notice of his mother or were ostensibly driven by his own motivations, which he could subsequently justify. He undertook the task of cleaning his own room, rationalizing that as a male he did not wish for a female to be present during the process. He would replace light bulbs if he were the first to discover them, and he would replace other objects he deemed unsuitable for women. He conducted his laundry at the training center and endeavored to maintain order in the other rooms, with the exception of his personal quarters. In essence, he demonstrated autonomy in addressing his own needs, with the exception of sustenance, for which he found no compelling rationale. Elara behavior was diametrically opposed to that of her sister. She was frequently responsible for creating disarray in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. Her personal quarters were subject to neglect, and the accumulation of disorder would reach a point where remedial action was required. In instances of disarray, she would leave her bedroom door open, creating an opportunity for her mother to observe her disorder and instruct Elara to rectify it, or for Elara herself to perceive the mess and take action. It has been demonstrated that the subject's behavior was indeed instigated by her mother. However, further analysis indicates that the subject derived a sense of gratification from the act of indulgence. Moreover, the subject displayed a lack of initiative in providing support and assistance to her sister. In his view, Elara should have been more vocal in her opposition and begun rejecting their requests. However, she did not take that course of action, and he was uncertain whether he had the authority to interfere in their personal relationship. The older sister exhibited a marked reluctance to engage in verbal communication. Consequently, the younger brother endeavored to communicate to her, on multiple occasions, the merits of expressing her sentiments more frequently. However, Elara did not endeavor to modify her approach in dealing with her circumstances or the other members of her family. Her disposition was characterized by a profound sense of affection, which he was able to discern. He could only hope that perhaps when she met her mate, things would be different, as she would leave the house and move in with him. Despite her many virtues, he was convinced that her partner would love her unconditionally. Regarding his other sister, he had consistently been exposed to the incoherent rhetoric his mother expounded on her promising future, which he regarded as nothing more than absurdity. If an individual as presumptuous as his sister ascended to the position of Luna within a pack, it would suggest a profound inversion of the established order. The Luna is arguably the most prepared female of the pack. She has developed the ability to serve as a sister, mother, and friend to her pack members. She was the one who maintained the connection between the pack members and the Alpha. The entity responsible for ensuring that the Alpha maintained an acceptable level of anger and ferocity. If his sister possessed the capacity to do so, it would be evident in her behavior, which would not manifest as the same level of petulance and haughtiness that is currently observed. Instead, she would demonstrate a sense of empathy and consideration for her older sister. It is his considered opinion, based on a thorough examination of the available evidence, that the pack that made Elara its Luna is likely to suffer a significant decline. The following is a list of relevant sources that will be consulted in the course of this study. Conversely, the busy bee was unaware of her siblings' verbal interactions occurring on the other side of the door. Having expeditiously removed the remnants of breakfast, Elara promptly proceeded to her room. The pain had diminished to a certain extent, and she was motivated to complete the garment she was currently working on. Since childhood, she had cultivated a passion for designing clothes, which ranked second in terms of her preferred activities. Indeed, the majority of her and her sister's attire was crafted by her own hand. Her brother's sartorial inclinations were more pronounced, as he preferred to acquire clothing on an individual basis. On the occasion of his birthday, she would prepare a shirt or a pair of pants for him. With regard to her mother, she exhibited a predilection for purchasing brand-name apparel, while her father adhered to the sartorial choices of his mother. Following a period of approximately 2 hours dedicated to the processes of cutting and stitching, the subject of this account extended her hands and administered a light tap to her shoulders. This action was indicative of her satisfaction with the completion of her sister's dress. The pink mermaid dress, featuring a high slit that extends from the ankle to above the thigh, was a specially requested design by Elara, who made this particular design a priority. She had endeavored to persuade her sister that the dress was ill-suited to her diminutive stature, yet her sister remained unpersuaded. She insisted on wearing a specific type of dress, rationalizing that she had to be the most remarkable of all. Annually, during the summer ball, unmated wolves from the pack were afforded an opportunity to find mates. This year marked a significant occurrence, as the young successor to the alpha position was expected to return and partake in the proceedings. In accordance with established tradition, the alpha heirs of each pack would depart from their places of residence at the age of 10. They would undertake training until they reached the age of 25. Canines, Canis lupus familiaris, had specific longevity, with a minimum life expectancy of 200 years. Subjects exhibited typical rates of aging until approximately 25 to 30 years of age, after which point their aging exhibited a deceleration, only to resume at a more rapid rate in the latter part of their lives. As these subjects matured, they typically found mates. The sole exception to this rule was the current king of the werewolves. For reasons that were not apparent, he was without a mate despite his advanced age of 100 years. Consequently, it is highly probable that Karen, the designated successor of their domestic pack, would also successfully locate a suitable partner. The future alpha's mate could not possibly be another woman other than Elara. This was Liara's unwavering conviction, as she perceived it to be her destined path. Nevertheless, she remained committed to making an impression on him through her physical appearance and refined style. After meticulously inspecting the dress to ensure the absence of any missing pins, Elara proceeded to hang it, taking care to prevent the formation of wrinkles. It was only subsequent to this event that she initiated the creation of her own dress. While she did not possess a strong inclination to attend the ball, participation was obligatory. Fortunately, the construction of the dress was less intricate than that of her sisters, resulting in a completion time of a single day, in contrast to the 4 days required for the mermaid gown. It is evident that she possesses the capacity to devise a more intricate scheme, although she is not inclined to do so. The time required for the execution of quotidian tasks and Liara's attire had her inundated with an unending deluge of work. Furthermore, the trajectory of the ball was rapidly approaching its target. Notwithstanding the temporal context, she did not relish the prospect of conspicuousness, and thus, the situation did not perturb her in the least. The off-shoulder white maxi dress, which was fitted around the waist and secured with a black bow before spreading wavy to the floor, was deemed to be an optimal choice for her preferences. After devoting additional hours to the task, she finally completed sewing her own dress. She then proceeded to hastily try on the garment and examined her reflection in the mirror to ascertain whether further adjustments to the fit were required. Fortunately, the gown was an optimal fit, accentuating her tall stature and narrow waist, and complementing her physique. Satisfied with her work, she proceeded to remove her shirt and place it on a hanger next to her sister's. Shortly after hanging the dress, the subject experienced a sharp pain in her heart and abdomen. The pain was significantly more intense than previous experiences, causing her to perceive a profound sense of cardiac distress. When the pain reached an intolerable level, she was compelled to succumb to a prostrate state. She exhibited signs of distress, including the constriction of her facial muscles and the onset of perspiration on her diminutive cranium. The recurrent episodes of discomfort were a source of perplexity for her, as she sought to discern their underlying causes. Naira offered a further apology, indicating that she was also experiencing the same level of discomfort, but that there was no physical issue with their bodies. Elara was aware that, as a lycanthrope, she exhibited a high degree of resilience to physical discomfort. Moreover, even if she did not possess this trait, her rapid healing capabilities should have rectified the issue if she had indeed suffered from a health complication prior to this. Consequently, the persistent cramps and aches were deemed to be atypical. Furthermore, she was cognizant of her superior strength in comparison to the typical werewolf, which further augmented her already formidable healing and resilience. Her confidence was not derived from her physical strength or the status of her lineage as the daughter of the current beta. The rationale underlying this phenomenon is attributable to the prevailing notion that higher-ranked werewolves undergo a shift at a significantly earlier juncture than their lower-ranked counterparts. The prevailing belief was that the timing of a werewolf's transformation directly correlated with its subsequent strength. This notion was further substantiated by the observation that alphas were the first to undergo the change. The first shift in the pelage typically occurs at approximately 17 to 18 years of age. The typical shift in beta and gammas from the 20 to 21 age group is a well-documented occurrence. The age range of 22 to 23 years old was observed to be typical of standard pack members, while individuals identified as omegas typically ranged from 24 years of age and older. Notably, her sister had recently achieved the first instance of shifting, at the optimal age for Aluna. The sole recognized exception to the 17-year limit was the present king of all werewolves, who, according to extant records, underwent a transformation at the age of 14. According to popular belief, her beta heritage should have enabled her to shift at the minimum age of 20. However, she shifted for the first time at the age of 13, and it was unprecedented for anyone to shift so early. Consequently, she deduced that this could only be attributed to one of the following two reasons. Firstly, her strength surpassed that of the typical werewolf. The initial inclination to interpret the phenomenon as merely an anomaly was driven by the belief that it held no inherent significance. Indeed, even the act of shifting itself appeared to be an anomalous occurrence, as she perceived having shifted on two separate occasions prior to reattaining her human form. The subject reported a total of 2 instances of audible bone cracking and rearrangement. In consideration of the aforementioned facts, she maintained the confidentiality of her shift and refrained from disclosing it to others. The motivation behind this endeavor is to dispel the notion that those who engage in this practice are anomalies. It should be noted that she was accustomed to leading a solitary existence and would never confide in anyone. Fortuitously, she was alone in the woods collecting berries to make jam when the pain of the shift overwhelmed her, and no one was present at that time to observe it. The shift was completed in a time frame of approximately 4 to 5 hours, and the outcome was deemed satisfactory. It has been demonstrated that every werewolf that has completed their first shift undergoes an immediate and positive transformation. The heightened sensitivity of all sensory modalities, including sight, hearing, and smell, is a notable characteristic. The qualities of strength, agility, and regeneration would become unrealistic. However, the aspect that most perplexed her was the retention of these qualities following her reversion to a human state. This subject matter was of particular interest to her, as she had previously learned in her education that, when in human form, a werewolf generally only retained a small percentage of the wolf form's senses and strengths. This rationale underpins the employment of the tracker and patrol werewolves, who are required to assume their wolf form while on duty. The subject did not perceive any distinction between the wolf form and the human form for the most part. However, she was inclined to consider it an anomaly. It was this conviction that she had held, until the day when, as she went to the forest for a run, she was surrounded by 3 outlaws who had breached the borders at the young age of 14. She was overwhelmed with fear in the presence of the ferocious and unruly creatures that were difficult to classify as werewolves. Their eyes, lacking in focus, their sharp fangs that protruded from their mouths, with saliva flowing uncontrollably from it, their clawed hands, their entire appearance suggested that they belonged to a different category of beings, more akin to creatures from horror stories than werewolves. At that time, she was a child, and, as she deliberated on the best course of action, her wolf took control of her body for the first time. The human aspect of Elara's being, known as the wolf within her psyche, transitioned into a state of observation, effectively superseding her own actions. As she observed the figure rip the 3 rogues to shreds with such swiftness and ease, despite not moving a muscle, she came to the realization that her initial assumption regarding her status as an anomaly was erroneous. It became evident that her strength exceeded that of a typical werewolf, yet the purpose behind this ability remained opaque to her. Fortunately, she was not required to mask her scent in that location in order to maintain her anonymity. At the moment when she was overwhelmed by uncertainty regarding an appropriate response to the patrol werewolves, who were likely to approach in pursuit of the intruders, a witch soared overhead. The witch exhibited a vivacious demeanor and, without soliciting information about the incident, cast a spell to dispel her presence from the immediate environment. Esm's modesty precluded her from soliciting information from her acquaintances, consequently, she maintained a long-standing friendship with her acquaintances. Despite the circumstances, they engaged in regular correspondence, and he was the sole individual aware of her strength. As she was lost in her thoughts, her hazy mind suddenly became clear when she felt another sting in her heart, before it completely subsided. It is imperative to note that the only type of pain that can be continuously experienced by a werewolf in the absence of an evident cause is referred to as phantom pain. The profound and unresolved nature of the discomfort could not be explained by any other factor. Nevertheless, she was hesitant to accept the hypothesis that the phenomenon was characterized by phantom pain. The occurrence of phantom pain has been documented in the literature as being limited to werewolves who have engaged in mating with multiple partners, and one of these partners has denied the bond. The emotional distress would be inflicted on the deceived partner each time their mate engaged in intimate contact with another werewolf. The manifestation of phantom pain was observed to be triggered even by a kiss. Given that Elara had not yet encountered her partner, it was implausible that her persistent discomfort could be of this nature. As the pang subsided, she elected to relinquish further contemplation of the issue. While engaged in the fabrication of the dresses, she had neglected her other tasks. As a result, she was already behind schedule, and it was nearly time to commence the preparation of dinner. Concurrently, Elara proffered cupcakes to her companions. The confectionery was composed of variously arranged, multicolored sweets, which were distributed among all present. However, the female attendees seemed reluctant to consume their pieces, maintaining a posture of contemplation. The aesthetic appeal of the cupcakes was accentuated by their meticulous decoration, with each cupcake exhibiting a unique and distinctive appearance. In the absence of a prior relationship, observers might reasonably infer that the items had been purchased by her. As always, you make the best desserts. One of her acquaintances exhibited a smile while she was inhaling the fruity fragrance emanating from her genitalia. I appreciate the compliment, but the dishes were quite simple to prepare. I am unable to accept your praise. In a state of evident embarrassment, she responded with a slight blush that stained her cheeks. Oh, you, always so modest. If the cakes were simple, then the question arises as to whether the dress one wears is equally uncomplicated. It is not within the scope of my awareness to comprehend the extent of my admiration for your aptitudes. Another girl exhibited a pouting expression, and proceeded to cut a small piece of her vanilla and blueberry cupcake. To be quite frank, if I were your older sister, I would be ashamed. It should be noted that the intent is not to insult her, but rather to highlight the recurring pattern of the younger sister outperforming her older sister. It is evident that I would be unable to tolerate such an arrangement. It is noteworthy that the subject underwent a shift at the age of 20, which would have been well suited to her role as the Luna. However, she did not successfully shift until she was 21, or approximately 22 years of age, a period that extended for nearly 2 years. Another girl, who was already consuming her portion and eyeing another, contributed to the discourse. Elara refrained from refuting the insults, as she found the words just fit to be the Luna to be enchanting. In the event that she had denied the allegations and attributed the baking of the delicious cakes, the completion of the majority of her school projects, and the creation of her attire to her sister, it is conceivable that the court would conclude that her sister would be a more suitable candidate for the Luna position than she. The potential consequences of this occurrence would be highly detrimental. In any case, as her younger sister, it was appropriate for her to accept the compliments on her behalf. Ultimately, the basis for the accusation was a misinterpretation on her part, as she had never explicitly stated that she was the source of the compliments received. Consequently, even in the present moment, when commendations were bestowed upon her for her cupcakes, she merely asserted that their preparation was uncomplicated. As she reflected further, she was also certain that her sister would not discover the truth. Elara maintained a reclusive lifestyle, with only occasional forays into the surrounding woods. Moreover, even if she were to discover the truth, Elara, as her elder sister, would provide her with support. A further rationale for the decision against correcting them was that their assertion regarding the sequence of events was accurate, with the initial movement being made by her. Given her older sister's advanced age at the time of her transition, it is highly improbable that she will achieve the maximum rank of a mate, which would typically be a beta or gamma. Conversely, if she is permitted to gather additional qualities, why should she be denied the opportunity to do so? As the subjects engaged in conversation, they observed men conversing nearby. One individual, in particular, appeared to be the most physically attractive person they had ever encountered. The subjects frequently cast furtive glances in his direction, their faces red with embarrassment. Despite her attempts to maintain composure, Elara exhibited a slight redness on her ears and cheeks. Shortly thereafter, one of the girls observed him at a more proximate distance and identified him as Karen, the alpha's heir who had recently returned to their pack. Subsequent to being made aware of the aforementioned information, the girls exhaled, acquiescing to the circumstances. It is highly probable that he would be considered an inferior competitor by these individuals. Therefore, the subjects persistently made physical contact with Elara and engaged in teasing behavior directed at her. Elara was the highest-ranked female werewolf of the same age as Karen, and it was highly probable that she would be his mate. The subject experienced a sense of embarrassment in response to their teasing and subsequent encouragement to proceed and make an introduction. However, she did not wish to do so, as she deemed it to be inappropriate. In actuality, her motivations were not as selfish as she had led on. Rather, she was motivated by the desire to present herself in the most optimal light, adorned in a gown crafted by Elara and adorned with sophisticated cosmetics. The presence of the ball invariably served as an indicator, prompting him to identify her scent and subsequently declare her as his partner in full view of all present. This approach would undoubtedly enhance the perceived glamour of the event. Her cheeks exhibited a pinkish hue, and her eyes radiated a luminous glow as she reflected on that moment. In any case, there were only a few more days before the occurrence of the event. She could wait for the dreamlike encounter. "Sister, I find it aesthetically pleasing. I look perfect." Elara's countenance exhibited a sense of contentment as she gazed intently at her reflection in the mirror. The white dress, adorned with a black bow at the waist, accentuated the curves of the wearer's physique. Despite the hem of the dress being pinned in several places due to its excessive length and the unavailability of sufficient time for modification, the garment maintained its aesthetic appeal. Fortunately, she had meticulously inquired about the heir's preferences and ascertained that, despite his frequent interactions with numerous women, he had confided in his closest companions that he sought an uncorrupted and sincere companion for Aluna. The dress she had commissioned her sister to create featured a low cut at the chest and a high slit along the side, characteristics that would not be considered conventional for a young woman of good standing. Upon realizing this, she experienced a sense of trepidation and promptly sought her sister's assistance, requesting a modification to the dress. However, as she swiftly opened the door to her sister's room, her gaze fell upon the dress her sister had meticulously prepared for herself. The subject's affinity for the design and color of the object was immediate and profound, prompting her to make an urgent request for it from Elara. She considered the incident to be a near miss. She was on the verge of humiliating herself, and Elara could have captured the attention of Karen instead of herself. Elara's attire was indicative of an unspoiled and virtuous young lady. It was evident that the subject's level of anxiety decreased significantly once her appearance was arranged in a composed manner. The cosmetics and coiffure were in perfect harmony with the gown. The subject reflected on her sister's profession as a magician, although she would never disclose this information to another individual. In any case, the rest of the world was of little consequence. Elara reflected on her ability to circumvent potential difficulties, a sentiment that was accompanied by a sense of contentment as she rotated, acknowledging her own worth. Elara maintained her observation of her companion, her sighing audible to the both of them. Her younger sister had always exhibited a certain degree of obstinacy. For instance, she consistently disregarded her sister's counsel regarding the selection of attire. However, her youthful charm often prevailed, compelling her to acquiesce to her sister's demands when the two engaged in the act of exchanging garments. As long as Elara was content, the outcome was deemed satisfactory. In any case, she had no desire to be the center of attention at the ball, so it would be prudent to opt for a more inconspicuous ensemble. Her mother soon arrived, arriving precisely as her younger daughter was at her most successful. "Indeed, your physical attractiveness is remarkable. The subject's appearance is satisfactory." It is often posited that attire can serve to accentuate an individual's presence. However, it is my belief that the individual's essence and presence are what truly enable the clothing to radiate and exude its inherent luster. This evening, you embody the essence of the moon itself. Myrna articulated her sentiments with elation, seemingly unconcerned with the fact that, in essence, her praise might be perceived as diminishing the significance of her eldest daughter's endeavor. She maintained a smile as she regarded her youngest daughter with admiration. Myrna, a beta female, was still required to cater to her Aluna. It is with a heavy heart that the present situation must be acknowledged, yet it is equally important to recognize that this will soon come to a definitive close. In the event that her daughter was selected to become the future alpha's mate, the current alpha would relinquish his position and vacate the pack house. This gesture was intended to facilitate a seamless transition of authority and leadership responsibilities to the newly selected alpha. If the former alpha and the newcomer continued to coexist, the pack members would experience a state of confusion in the event of a conflict between the two, as they would be uncertain as to whose directives they should adhere to. The new alpha should have complete submission from his pack members. In order to circumvent such circumstances, the former alpha would customarily depart for the royal palace to assume the role of a royal guard. Their tenure would extend for no more than a year. Subsequently, their participation in pack activities became intermittent, and they ceased to engage in the group's endeavors. Consequently, with the departure of the elderly couple and the ascension of their daughter to the role of ruler, the situation was expected to reach a state of equilibrium. The esteem she would garner from her roles as the mother of the Luna and the grandmother of the prospective alpha was incommensurate with that of being the beta female. It is noteworthy that even the beta was subject to the authority of the alpha. The only individual who could be considered his equal was his partner. However, Myrna failed to acknowledge that the Luna would be the only one to match her in status, not the Luna's family as a whole. The mother was asked whether the girls were ready. Lucienne was approached with haste and a query was posed. The inquiry made as the head of the person in question emerged from the doorway that had been left ajar. He had been designated as the family's designated driver for the evening. The subject's father was traveling at the time, and the subject was the only man in the house. "Affirmative, Elara is prepared." The mother immediately replied, failing to take note of the plural form of the question. "Mother, I specified that I was referring to girls." While it is evident that she has donned formal attire, Elara remains in her domestic garments. "Oh, yes. The subject's attire is yet to be determined. We will arrive after the designated hour." Her mother inquired, her countenance betraying a sense of displeasure and disappointment, expressing her discontent regarding Elara's actions, which were impeding their departure. "I was unable to assist Elara with her preparations while I was being attired. Additionally, I am required to procure an alternative gown, as the pink mermaid dress I previously crafted for her is inadequate in terms of length for my frame." Elara articulated her perspective in a composed manner, undeterred by her mother's demeanor. This phenomenon, in which individuals are held responsible for events that they did not cause, had already become a recurring theme. Very well, locate an alternate garment for yourself. In any case, the dress appears more flattering on Elara. Why did you not prepare it for her initially and instead prepare something else for yourself? Myrna exhaled, opting not to acknowledge her misstep, and proceeded. The past is the past. We will proceed with the endeavor of locating an alternative. It is possible that one may encounter a romantic partner this evening. As a descendant of a beta, there is a possibility that you could identify another beta, or at the very least, a gamma. Lucien will return after sending us there to bring you as well. At the ball, members of other packs were also in attendance, which increased the probability of Elara finding her mate. Elara's response was limited to a subtle gesture of affirmation, opting not to elaborate further on her mother's statements. Despite her divergent views from her mother, she refrained from contradicting her. However, in reality, she did not wish to locate her mate under any circumstances. She perceived that the pursuit of a romantic partnership and subsequent establishment of domesticity were not aligned with her personal aspirations. She had already resolved to make a swift appearance at the venue, after which she would conceal herself in the garden or an alternative location. Given the assumption that her mother's attention would be diverted to her sister, it could be deduced that the sister's safety was assured. Her lifelong ambition had been to become a moonlight for the council. These individuals were the guardians who ensured that the alpha of a pack did not transgress the established boundaries. The individual packs could be regarded as diminutive states, discreetly situated within global forest ecosystems, operating under the governance of a unified monarchy. The establishment of individual regulations was undertaken by each entity, however. These regulations were expected to align with the overarching directives stipulated by the central authority, embodied by the figure of the king of the pack. Indeed, it could be argued that each alpha of a pack could be regarded as a high-ranking warrior within the army of the king. This phenomenon can be attributed to the fact that, at a young age, they would leave their homes to attend the royal palace for education and training. It is also worth noting that they would return to the royal palace when a new alpha was established. However, due to the substantial number of packs, the king deemed it impractical to oversee them individually, thus leading to the establishment of the council. It was responsible for the education of the alphas, the enforcement of general laws, and the issuance of punishments for alphas who did not adhere to the established legal framework. The council's primary agents, known as the Watchers, were entrusted with the responsibility of ensuring the enforcement of the law under the directives of the 12 councilmen. She had been privy to numerous accounts concerning the Watchers, and it was widely acknowledged that they were the most formidable warriors, surpassing even the most formidable alphas in their prowess. These individuals were characterized by their firm but equitable demeanor, having successfully defended numerous packs against the predatory aggression of alphas. Furthermore, they were regarded as the idols of all the Omegas, who were the most ostracized members of a pack. Elara's aspiration to become one herself was evident in her aspirations, which she had attempted to convey to her mother. However, her mother did not appear to be receptive to this idea. The subject posited that her transition occurred at a later age, thereby precluding her from becoming a warrior due to her insufficiently developed wolf. This assertion was accompanied by a dismissive reaction, characterized by derision and the labeling of the aspiration as a childish dream. She was on the verge of disclosing the truth to her mother at that precise moment, and confessing that she had in fact shifted earlier than expected. The subject did not disclose the fact that she had shifted at a relatively young age. However, she contemplated articulating that her shift occurred in close proximity to her 18th birthday. This was her plan at that time. However, she did not proceed with the implementation of the aforementioned plan due to her mother's reasoning that she would become a bad role model for her younger sister. It is important to consider the possibility that her sister may also wish to become a warrior, motivated by her own experiences. This was not anticipated, but prior to her current aspiration of becoming a moonlight, she contemplated the feasibility of becoming a designer for clothes. Her sister expressed a similar aspiration. Consequently, her mother prohibited her from ever disclosing additional dreams to Elara and denied her request. In conclusion, Myrna expressed her belief that it would be advisable for her to cease her profane discourse. It is reasonable to hypothesize that she should prepare to become a housewife, as she demonstrated aptitude in that role, and it is also the most realistic option for her. Her mother's words did not demoralize her, rather, she reflected on them and accepted the part that she should not influence her sister. Therefore, as long as her sister found a suitable partner, it is unlikely that she would be compelled to follow a similar path. This would allow her to pursue her own aspirations without the constraints imposed by her sister's actions. Despite her profound affection for her sister, she aspired to pursue her own aspirations. It is possible that favorable circumstances will prevail this evening, leading to the successful retrieval of her sister by a suitable partner. In light of these considerations, she conducted a meticulous search in her wardrobe, ultimately locating a white maxi dress. The gown was not entirely appropriate for a formal occasion, it was more of a summer dress. However, she did not possess any other formal dresses, other than the one Elara had taken. The garment under consideration features an array of floral embellishments along the lowermost portion of the hem, gradually diminishing in density as they ascend towards the waist. The dress, predominantly white in hue, remains the sole exception in its ability to pass as formal attire. She promptly donned her attire, opting for minimal cosmetic enhancement, and secured a strand of her lengthy raven tresses with a clip positioned above her ear. Due to temporal constraints, the subject was unable to style her hair, which had been secured in a disheveled bun. Upon reaching below her waist, the hair appeared slightly wavy. She performed a final inspection of her appearance in the mirror, concluding just as she heard the sound of an approaching car's horn. The ball was in proximity to their home, and consequently, her brother returned within a span of 30 minutes. She swiftly retrieved her purse and, with remarkable agility, reached the front door in an instant. In the absence of others, she was able to employ her full velocity with greater ease. Despite their lycanthropic nature, the subjects would have been incapable of tracking her movements, which would have been a source of astonishment for them. This realization occurred subsequent to her visit to the training facility to deliver lunch to her brother, during which she observed the training of the pack's most adept warriors. From her perspective, the subject's movements appeared to be sluggish. It seemed as though she could evade any of their strikes. The subject's strength was not commensurate with that of the subject. It appeared that the latter could effortlessly subdue the former, should she choose to do so. The training received by the subjects in the context of their training regimen was not commensurate with the training the subject received independently in the wooded area. Initially, she perceived their actions as mere jest, and they exercised restraint during training, not employing their maximum velocity and strength to conserve energy. However, her brother had informed her that they had indeed exerted maximum effort during training, as evidenced by a casual conversation they had had. She promptly halted at the doorway, meticulously arranging the disheveled strands of hair, and then proceeded to open the door. She then reduced her pace, descending the stairs more deliberately, her destination being her brother's car. It was not necessary to hasten your pace. I am writing to inform you of my recent arrival. It is still possible to prepare if one so chooses. The ball has just begun. Her brother interjected promptly. He regarded her and perceived that his older sister possessed a greater degree of physical attractiveness than his second older sister. The subject's eyes, which were brown in color, were noted for their similarity to chocolate, a quality that complemented her slightly tanned, flawless skin. Her nose was characterized as straight and pointed, her lips were described as plump, even in the absence of significant lipstick, and her cheeks were noted for their rosy pink hue. The overall effect was one of harmony and proportion, with all features aligning seamlessly on her small face. Her attire was modest, and her hairstyle was unremarkable. However, she was able to compete with her sister on equal footing. Her sister had applied full makeup, a complex hairstyle, and was wearing a formal ball gown. If Elara exerted more effort, it is certain that Elara would not receive any attention if the two were in the same room. However, Elara never made an effort to ensure this outcome. No, it is not necessary. I would like to express my gratitude. We can proceed. She reassured him with a slight smile. In response, he nodded, opting not to pursue the matter further, recognizing her sincerity in her reply. Precisely 15 minutes later, the subjects arrived at the designated ball. She proceeded into the ballroom alone, as her brother remained outside to park the car. Upon entering, she briefly surveyed the surroundings, but did not demonstrate any inclination to examine the venue. In any case, her sole objective was to locate her mother, thereby substantiating her arrival and promptly departing to conceal herself until the designated time for departure. She surveyed her environs and ultimately discerned her mother, but prior to her ability to proceed in the direction of her mother, an unfortunate incident occurred when a waiter made contact with her, resulting in the inadvertent spillage of the final glass of wine he was carrying directly onto her attire. Typically, she possessed the ability to evade him based on her agility and swiftness of reflexes. However, the discomfort she had been experiencing during these recent days, occurring at intermittent and unpredictable intervals, resurfaced with considerable intensity. The experience left her breathless and altered her sensory perception. In the face of the discomfort, she endeavored to maintain her composure, striving to remain upright and seek her mother. At this moment, Elara's mother had already noticed her daughter, so she simply indicated her intention to clean the dress by pointing to it and gesturing that she was going to clean it. Upon observing the vivid red hue on the white garment, her mother emitted a sigh and nodded in agreement. In fact, Elara found the experience to be superior to her initial expectations. Consequently, she had a legitimate justification for her failure to execute the maneuver. She promptly sought refuge from the bustling crowds, opting to take respite in the garden's more secluded areas. There, she located a bench, where she could sit undisturbed. Fortunately, the pain had already subsided. Its duration was significantly shorter than previous instances in which it had persisted for hours on end. In certain instances, the severity of the symptoms was such that the patient was awakened in the midst of the night, with the condition significantly impacting her overall sensory perception, which typically exhibited optimal functionality. The sole issue was that, at that precise moment, the discomfort she experienced was more pronounced than it had been when the pain had taken a more protracted duration to subside. For a period of time, she remained seated on the bench, observing the aesthetic appeal of the fountain. A sense of perplexity regarding the intermittent nature of the discomfort she was experiencing led her to contemplate the possibility of contacting Esme and inquiring about the nature of the issue with the witch. The primary skill of the aforementioned friend was healing, and she should have a superior aptitude for detecting the nature of the affliction in comparison to her pack doctor. Despite this, she was reluctant to seek medical attention to ascertain the underlying cause and to receive an appropriate treatment plan. One of the primary instruments utilized by medical practitioners for the purpose of diagnosing ailments was an orb known as the seer. Upon contact with the crystalline sphere by a lycanthrope, the seer's capacity to discern precise issues was amplified. However, this augmentation was accompanied by a concomitant revelation of the werewolf's potency. What diagnostic findings would a seer present in this case? Would this observation serve to substantiate the hypothesis that she was an anomalous case? Despite having consulted extensively on the subject, she had never encountered another individual with a comparable situation. In this case, the shift at 13 years of age was merely the proverbial tip of the iceberg. The other fact was even more peculiar. The internal workings of her mind were even more enigmatic. For a period of several minutes, she remained in her seat. However, as she observed other individuals entering the section of the garden in which she was situated, she was compelled to commence ambulation in order to circumvent any potential encounters. After traversing the grounds for a period exceeding 30 minutes, her attention was drawn to the intricately adorned garden and the profusion of color in the floral arrangements. Concurrently, she perceived an unidentified individual approaching her. On this occasion, she sought a location that was even more secluded than the last, motivated by a desire to ascertain the identity of the individual who had approached her. Consequently, she pivoted to face the source of the disturbance. The following is a list of key elements that must be included in any discussion of this subject. Elara inquired about the status of her attire, specifically whether it had been cleaned. Elara's mother inquired shortly after Elara's rotation. However, Myrna, the mother of the subject, could clearly discern the presence of the wine stain. This smile, directed at the daughter, came as something of a surprise to her, as her mother's facial expressions were not known to include smiles, even in circumstances that would typically be considered praiseworthy. "Oh, you." It is evident that a certain degree of carelessness was exhibited. This location is not amenable to removal. She exhaled audibly and proceeded with her statement. "It appears that there is no alternative course of action. I will contact your brother and request that he escort you home. It is not appropriate for you to walk around in this dress." Elara experienced a profound sense of astonishment, as her mother had not proposed a change of attire and a subsequent return, despite the fact that the ball had not yet reached its midpoint. However, she did not inquire further into the matter. This was also her preference. It was decided that the most prudent course of action would be to wait for the individual in question in the yard. She expressed her state of composure and indifference. No, it would be preferable to wait by his car. What if an observer were to perceive you in this state? Myrna promptly responded. It is evident that the subject has consented to the proposed course of action. Elara's immediate acquiescence was followed by her direct departure. The subject did not consider it to be a significant issue. It was merely a pinkish-violet hue that persisted as spots on the fabric as the garment underwent the drying process. The dress, which had been adorned with floral embellishments, did not appear so unsightly that she felt compelled to conceal herself. However, if her mother experienced a sense of embarrassment, she would heed her counsel. Upon arriving at the parking lot, her brother was similarly taken aback by her decision to return home. Historically, his mother would have insisted on her return, perceiving it as a lack of respect for the family if she did not participate. It would be unfortunate if his sister were unable to locate a suitable partner. Are you certain that you do not wish to change your mind and return with me? What if you could identify a suitable partner this evening? He inquired, ensuring that she was unequivocally not desirous of returning. He did not encounter any difficulties in operating the vehicle. Given the circumstances, it is reasonable to assume that, upon traversing the interior of the ballroom, the subject would have been able to locate the author by means of the author's olfactory emissions alone. It is possible that he was not present. There is always next year. In her response, she articulated the underlying rationales for her actions. Consequently, he ceased to press the issue. His sister was aware that his actions were not merely a polite gesture. Her introverted personality and aversion to social gatherings rendered it inevitable that she would decline an invitation to the ball. On the following morning, as was customary, she prepared the breakfast table precisely as the members of her family ascended the stairs. The silence that ensued was peculiar, as none of the four individuals at the table had any anecdotes from the previous night to share. Despite the fact that she herself had not found a suitable partner at the ball, she believed that her sister would have been successful in doing so. Her mother had been steadfast in her conviction that a future alliance between the young alpha of their pack and Elara was imminent. Consequently, she should have been the chosen mate of the alpha, the Luna. The question thus arises as to why this information was not disseminated more widely. Elara's age at the time of her shift was optimal for her to become a Luna. It is conceivable that she was merely the companion of another alpha, and therefore, she did not encounter him the previous night. She expressed curiosity regarding the events that transpired with her sister the previous night. However, she recognized that if any occurrence had indeed transpired, her sister would have already informed her and would have been visibly animated about it. However, her sister was standing correctly and consuming her breakfast, and she refrained from prying. Additionally, she was reluctant to cause any emotional distress to her sister by broaching the subject directly. As the meal concluded, Elara rose from her chair and began clearing the table by removing the plates and leftovers. However, just as she was about to commence her cleaning activities, she was intercepted by her mother, who appeared to have an announcement to make. "Elara, I have reflected on the information you provided me with some time ago. It is imperative to consider the training for the Moonlight initiation. I am in agreement with your assessment of the situation." Myrna exhaled, her countenance expressing remorse. It is evident that the situation has been challenging for all involved over the years. It is evident that I have imposed a more stringent disciplinary regimen on you than on your sister and brother. However, I have done so under the assumption that, as the eldest, you possess the necessary maturity to handle such expectations. The ethical implications of this decision are evident. Consequently, I have devoted time to introspection and contemplation on this matter. She paused momentarily to assess Elara's emotional state. As was typical, her daughter's countenance remained inscrutable. Her emotional state was not discernible by external observation. A conversation was had with Cynthia this morning, and the Royal Academy was contacted via telephone. Fortunately, the training for this year's selection is scheduled to commence next week. I have even reserved a flight for the following day, allowing sufficient time for you to acclimatize before the commencement of the training program. Therefore, it is recommended that no household tasks be performed today, with the exception of the preparation of one's personal belongings. Is everything in order? Upon concluding her remarks, Myrna approached Elara and embraced her gently. Despite the absence of overt facial expressions, Elara's countenance revealed a state of astonishment. It was her belief that it would be prudent to await her sister's discovery of a suitable partner before engaging in further discourse with her mother. However, not only did she not receive any communication regarding this matter, she was now scheduled to attend the academy without any discernible effort on her mother's part to persuade her. It is evident that an anomalous occurrence was transpiring. She perceived a desire on her mother's part to remove her from her familial environment. To elaborate, the subject in question was not merely expelled from the group, rather, it was ejected from the pack. The underlying reasons for this phenomenon remain opaque to her. Myrna's actions indicated a notable departure from her usual comportment, exhibiting a marked disregard for her client's preferences and a disregard for her own counsel. However, irrespective of the underlying motivations behind her mother's desire for her departure, it held no significance for her, as it did not pose a threat to her well-being. As long as she was able to pursue her desired course of action, she found contentment. Consequently, she was able to embark on the journey towards her professional aspirations. Very well. I am going to go pack. She made her statement with alacrity, then departed. She expressed a desire to avoid any alteration in her mother's position on the matter. Mother, what precisely occurred? Lucien experienced a state of profound astonishment. It was utterly inconceivable that his mother would act in such a manner. It was inconceivable that she would alter her position with such abruptness regarding a matter that she had previously and definitively resolved. Moreover, it was the first occasion on which he was made aware of his sister's aspiration to become a moonlight. It was evident that her aspiration to become a designer had been a long-standing one, dating back to her childhood years. Furthermore, she possessed the necessary skills and aptitude for the field. However, a moonlight, a warrior, had never even seen her shift. The question arises as to whether she possessed the potential to become the highest grade warrior. It is evident that she possesses the capacity to accomplish a wide range of objectives, a conviction that is further substantiated by her unwavering determination. He harbored reservations regarding his physical strength, despite his academic excellence, well-tailored attire, and diligent household responsibilities. Please clarify the nature of the recent occurrence. At a certain point in time, your sister inquired as to whether I would permit her to participate in the 6-month training program that is necessary to take the examination that grants access to the Royal Academy's Moonlight course. I initially believed that she lacked the necessary physical aptitude for the task, and therefore, I denied her request. After further consideration, it became evident that the individual in question consistently exerts a significant amount of effort on behalf of the collective, yet never requests compensation or recognition for her contributions. It would be ethically problematic for me to withhold this wish from her. Myrna articulated her sentiments, her eyes betraying a sense of remorse and culpability. However, I had never previously been made aware of such a dream. It is evident that the subject in question possesses a level of strength that is nearly equivalent to that of an alpha, and perhaps even exceeds it in certain respects. It is also noteworthy that the demographic of female viewers is not a significant factor in the show's viewership statistics. Lucienne expressed bewilderment, stating, "I am truly perplexed by this matter." No, that is not the case. We inquired yesterday when we contacted the relevant parties, but it was determined that there is no regulation that would prevent a female subject from participating in the testing. As previously stated, it is my estimation that the subject will not achieve any notable accomplishments. However, it should be noted that there are no discernible drawbacks to this course of action. In the event that the patient complies with the prescribed regimen, she will be discharged 6 months later, at which point she will be able to resume her normal life. Alternatively, she could be pursuing the possibility of establishing a relationship with one of the numerous individuals she encounters. Lucienne reflected on the matter and came to the conclusion that his mother's actions were indeed correct. Despite his suspicion that there might be additional factors influencing his mother's decisions, he recognized that there was no valid reason for his sister to refrain from pursuing her aspirations. It had been hypothesized that locating a suitable companion might alleviate the burden on her shoulders. However, the ability to pursue her aspirations without the interference of Elara and his mother was equally satisfying. Prior to her departure on her flight, Elara's schedule was entirely occupied. The imminent departure for a 6-month excursion was not without its challenges. She was unable to exit the residence, even for a brief exercise. Her brother procured the other necessities she required. She was cognizant of the fact that her superiors did not have confidence in her abilities. Nevertheless, she derived a sense of personal satisfaction from the fact that they had allowed her to attend the academy. It is possible that her mother's actions were not driven by ulterior motives. She had previously engaged in dialogue with her. While her mother may not have been a particularly equitable individual, she nevertheless remained her biological mother. It is reasonable to assume that she would express her best wishes for her future success. Following a brief period of rest, during which she was primarily engaged in preparations for her journey, she was escorted to the airport by her brother and mother. Curiously, she had not encountered her sister since the previous day's breakfast, though she did not consider herself at fault. This marked the first instance that Elara had been separated from her for such an extended period, which might have led to feelings of discontent on her part regarding her departure. She would contact her later to address the issue, she thought to herself. She consistently demonstrated a high level of care and responsibility towards Elara, at times evoking the sentiment of a secondary maternal figure. She would grant her a period of solitude in order to facilitate the process of sorting through her emotions. Elara had reached adulthood at the age of 20. It is imperative that she prioritize the resolution of her personal issues. It is imperative that you prioritize your own well-being. It is imperative to acknowledge the profound sense of familial connection that transcends the conventional boundaries of kinship. In 6 months, should you succeed in passing the examination and enrolling in the course, you will have my utmost admiration. Otherwise, I will still be proud of you for making an attempt. Her mother expressed her desire for her well-being, embracing her in a final gesture of affection. The long flight concluded, and she arrived at her destination's airport. She collected her luggage and awaited the arrival of the vehicle at the designated entrance. Her mother informed her that an escort from the academy would be present. Subsequently, a black SUV came to a halt in proximity to her. A middle-aged man emerged from the source, and, perceiving the scent of her wolf, he proceeded directly toward her. "Greetings. I have been designated as the responsible individual for driving while under the influence of alcohol. May I inquire as to whether you are Miss Elara Quinn?" The older man inquired politely. In response, she nodded and greeted him in a courteous manner. With a smile, he retrieved the luggage from her hand and assisted her in stowing it into the trunk. Subsequent to the man's assumption of the driver's seat, the woman proceeded to occupy the passenger seat. Throughout his extensive tenure as a driving instructor at the academy, he had never observed a female candidate undertaking the examination. Typically, a moonlight exhibited the strength of an alpha, and alphas were exclusively male. He experienced a certain degree of intrigue when he was asked to provide transportation from the airport. The individual in question must be assessed to determine if they are a person of limited intelligence, one who engages in unrealistic aspirations, or if they possess the necessary capabilities. Despite his attempts to conceal his astonishment, it was evident on his face. The individual before him exhibited the distinctive characteristics of a moonlight, not a mere potential. She perceived herself as a fully educated individual, having completed the necessary academic requirements and obtained the designation of a full moonlight. This occurrence can be attributed to the fact that Elara's barrier was beginning to dissipate, thereby unveiling a portion of her latent abilities. The physical and psychological strain of grappling with an unknown ailment for a prolonged period had manifestly taken a toll on her body. Furthermore, in her role within the pack, she consistently endeavored to subdue her abilities, recognizing the inherent limitations that prevented her from attaining the same level of potency as the alpha. This would be perceived as a challenge to his leadership, and consequently, from the age when she vanquished the rogues, she learned to create a metaphorical wall around herself, concealing her power. This was also counsel Esme had previously offered her, but at this point in time, it was no longer necessary for her to do so. After driving for several hours, she gazed out the window of the vehicle in silence. This marked her inaugural incursion into the domain of humans. The experience of observing the images that she had previously only encountered in television programming in reality was peculiar. Her concerns about the future were palpable. While she was confident in her strength, she harbored uncertainties regarding the adequacy of her abilities. In a state of absolute silence, her mood oscillated incessantly between elation and uncertainty, accompanied by a pervasive sense of apprehension. Upon arriving at the academy, the driver halted in front of the institution's imposing iron gates and awaited authorization to proceed. A guard, attired in a black uniform and possessing a substantial physique, approached the vehicle. Upon observing the driver, the guard signaled his acknowledgement through a nod, and subsequently proceeded to open the gates. The interior of the academy was vast, she thought. From the front gate to the intended destination, the journey required an additional 20 minutes. As the subject progressed along the designated route, a series of colossal edifices were observed, arranged in a linear configuration. The evident renovations to the property imparted a modern and old feel simultaneously. The edifices in question had been constructed hundreds of years prior. There was not a single structure that was newly erected. The layout of the academy remained unaltered since its construction. It underwent maintenance as time elapsed and renovations as technology evolved. Upon exiting the vehicle, she was greeted by a diminutive secretary who assisted her with the luggage, despite her refusal. The secretary guided her through the corridors of a structure that bore resemblance to a dormitory, while elucidating the subsequent selection process. Regrettably, we do not have a dormitory exclusively for female candidates, therefore, you will be required to reside with the other male candidates, of whom there are over 1,000 this year. However, there is no cause for concern, as each individual will be allotted their own private quarters and restroom facilities. Consequently, interactions will be limited to communal areas such as the common rooms or the kitchen. Meals are served at 7 a.m., 12 p.m., and 6 p.m. The provision of cooked meals in the common room is executed with strict adherence to schedule, and it is imperative that students arrive at the designated time. In addition, students are permitted to engage in activities of their choosing during their leisure time until the commencement of the examination. Should further elucidation on the selection process be required, additional information can be obtained. The speaker articulated her points with remarkable eloquence. Then, she directed her gaze at Elara, ascertaining whether she had been paying attention, and proceeded to offer further information. The examination is scheduled to commence at 8 a.m. on Monday. Its duration is contingent upon the total number of candidates and the options selected, with an approximate duration of 1 month. Annually, the assessments are segmented into 4 components, with each component occurring on the initial day of each week. It is imperative to note that progression to the subsequent examination is contingent upon the successful completion of the preceding one. An evaluation of the subject's capabilities will be conducted, encompassing the following domains: the strength of the wolf, its intelligence, its capacity to adapt and manage challenges, and its combat prowess. The initial examination entails the placement of the hand on the seer, thereby enabling the direct assessment of the wolf's power. It is imperative to note that the confidentiality of the examination is paramount. The instructor who administers the examination is bound by a strict obligation to maintain the secrecy of the student's grades. Furthermore, a curse has been placed upon him, ensuring that the dissemination of a wolf's power to any individual other than the king or the Council of 12 will inevitably lead to his demise. The second examination is a written test that will determine the subject's IQ. It is imperative that any prospective moonlight possesses a comprehensive understanding of the subject matter, which we endeavor to facilitate over the course of the subsequent 2 years. However, it remains crucial to ascertain whether the individual possesses the capacity to assimilate the entirety of the instructional material. The third examination will take the form of liberal discussions with the faculty. The procedure entails the extraction of a note from a ballot, which will present a situation to be addressed. The subject is then required to formulate a response outlining the recommended course of action. The final examination is contingent upon the successful completion of the preceding 3 examinations. The competition will entail a series of free fights between the candidates. It is anticipated that the conflict will take the form of a melee war. The final 10 men remaining will be inducted into the student body. It is imperative to note that the capacity is limited to 10 participants, and no exceptions will be made to this policy. The attainment of a placement within the top 10 positions will result in the candidate's acceptance into the Moonlight course, which is a 2-year program culminating in direct employment. She articulated her perspective with a certain degree of firmness. The following text is intended to provide a comprehensive overview of the subject matter. And thus, I conclude my elucidation on the selection process. Do you have any questions? Upon arriving at the designated location, the secretary inquired politely, as is customary, and was directed to the room that had been prepared for Elara by the Academy. There is only one. I possess a modicum of knowledge regarding the process prior to admission to the Moonlight course, as I have previously engaged in its study. It is noteworthy that even in the previous year, the exams were administered only after a period of 6 months of training. It is imperative to ascertain the rationale behind the decision to expedite the exam this year, thereby compromising the participants' opportunity to undergo the requisite preliminary training. The subject's indifference regarding the examination's progression was evident, as she had engaged in meticulous preparation for an extended period. The majority of her leisure time was dedicated to this pursuit. Her inquiry was driven by a desire to understand the underlying reasons for this phenomenon. I was not informed of the specific rationale behind the decision, but based on my understanding, it appears to be related to the housing situation. The Academy is a sizable facility, yet its primary function is not exclusively for the benefit of spectators. This institution is also a site of learning for a variety of individuals, including doctors, trackers, betas, gammas, and other warriors. This year, a significant number of requests were received for the Moonlight course. Typically, the attendance is approximately 300 individuals, given the limited number of Moonlight posts, which is only 3 per year. However, it should be noted that the number of available positions has increased to 10 this year, thereby explaining the observed increase in the number of requests. The timing of the examination is also a matter of significance. It is being administered at this particular juncture, prior to the commencement of the regular academic schedule for the other courses. Traditionally, the examination would be held during the autumn semester, not the summer one. Consequently, upon the arrival of the other students, there will not be sufficient rooms to accommodate all individuals. The Secretary's conduct was consistent with professional standards. In response to the inquiry, she articulated her perspective without resorting to mockery or a condescending demeanor. Elara perceived that she was not regarded with disdain for being the sole female candidate, and she was appreciative of this gesture. I would like to express my gratitude for the information you have provided. It is anticipated that the individual in question will experience a positive outcome from this point forward. Additionally, I would like to express my sincere apologies for the extended duration of this interaction. It is acceptable. This is my duty. The Secretary offered a concise response and, for the first time, smiled. As the Secretary had already completed her assigned tasks, Elara bid her farewell before proceeding to organize her attire and inspect her accommodations. While it was not ostentatious, the interior appeared to be entirely original. She was already aware that the king invested a significant amount of effort in the realm of education, personally overseeing its management and budgetary allocation. He would even come each year for inspection. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.